Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent McCory in for Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Monday, October the 25th. This is Africa 54.
Sudan's military seizes power and arrests the prime minister. We'll have details. As Kenya prepares to return to the polls in 2022, a nationwide voter drive raises concerns. And the South Korean television show Squid Game becomes Netflix's biggest series launch ever. We'll explain why it's so popular.
We begin our broadcast with the crisis in Sudan, where the nation's top military officer, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has declared a state of emergency and dissolved the Joint Civilian Military Council that has run the country for the past 2 years. Al-Burhan spoke to a news conference Monday after military forces arrested Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok and other officials of the ruling Sovereign Council. Sudan's Information Ministry, which continued to publish statements online, reported that Hamdok was arrested for refusing to support a coup. Protests erupted in Khartoum Monday following a report of Hamdok's arrest. VOA journalist Michael Atit, who is in the capital of Khartoum, says that thousands of people, most of them young adults, were on the streets and marching towards the center of the city. Atit also reported hearing gunfire and seeing tires burned in the streets. Reports that most telecommunications in the capital have shut down, including the internet and radio stations. Only a state-owned television station was on the air, broadcasting patriotic music, according to Atit. One Sudanese protester says the people want a democracy.
The return of the old regime is impossible, no matter what was the excuse and justification. The return is impossible. This is the first statement of the people. Women and men are refusing any kind of fraud on democracy and civil life.
Hamdok, an economist and diplomat who has worked for the UN, was named the country's transitional prime minister in August 2019. He leads an interim government that took power following the oust of longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir, who was arrested during widespread street protests. The country is preparing for elections late next year, and under the constitution, Hamdok is forbidden from running. But Hamdok has faced stiff resistance from elements of the country's military. On September 21st, forces loyal to al-Bashir used tanks to block a key bridge and attempted to seize power. The coup was put down and dozens of soldiers were arrested. Last week, thousands of protesters took to the streets to voice concerns about the prospect of a return to military rule. Now, Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, tweeted out his reaction earlier Monday to the events in Sudan, saying, quote, "I condemn the ongoing military coup in Sudan. Prime Minister Hamdok and all other officials must be released immediately. There must be full respect for the constitutional charter to protect the hard-won political transition. The UN will continue to stand with the people of Sudan," end quote. Meanwhile, the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sudan, Volker Perthes, has released a statement on Monday on the situation in Sudan. Quote, "I am deeply concerned about reports of an ongoing coup and attempts to undermine Sudan's political transition. The reported detentions of the Prime Minister, government officials, and politicians are unacceptable. I call on the security forces to immediately release those who have been unlawfully detained or placed under house arrest. It is the responsibility of these forces to ensure the security and well-being of people in their custody. I urge all parties to exercise utmost restraint. All parties must immediately return to dialogue and engage in good faith to restore the constitutional order," end quote. Now, for more on the unfolding situation in Sudan, Raga Makawi, editor of African Affairs platform and a Sudanese analyst, joins me live via Skype from London. Ms. Makawi, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, since the ouster of Omar al-Bashir, it has been 2.5 years of a slow progress towards democracy. But what went wrong and when, really?
So from the beginning, the transitional process was established on an uneasy alliance, one whose fissures, if you look closely, you could see them either in the continuous fracturing of groups and emergence and diversions of alliances within the FFC, and then also with and in between the military and the militia. Add on top of that now the signatories of the JPA. So there are many groups working together, different elites with different agendas, coming together and diverging. Those of us who are following the daily developments we'd be able to see the faltering progress. So you would never call it a perfect process by any stretch. And we saw these problems in the daily clashes that affected the day-to-day running of government, as well as in the long-term policy frameworks from economic management to foreign policy that were adopted and support to them. So it was never really bliss, and storm was always brewing just beneath the surface.
Now, you mentioned those tensions that have existed since the beginning of, this transitional government. Was there any effort to kind of smoothen them out, resolve some of these issues if both parties had the same intention of having a democratic system take root in Sudan?
I would say that there were attempts. A lot of the government's work was also a lot of its time was spent on creating side committees to try and resolve internal conflict. So there was an attempt, but it seems that the parties to it were not as keen, or that they were keen to a degree until alternative interests or opportunities emerged. And then these alliances again would break down.
Yes. Now, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan appeared on television, and what he said is that the military was still committed to democratic elections by mid-2023. What do you make of that?
So it's not uncommon for military dictatorships to use the guise of representational democracy through elections to achieve international recognition and some local and national legitimacy. Bashir did that, and also so did Nimeri back in the 70s. However, elections, if one is to consider the trajectory of the constitutional document upon which the entire transitional period is predicated, it stipulates many provisions whose proper and accountable implementation is necessary to deliver the country to fair and free elections. So you don't jump from this point to elections.
Yeah. Now, there were some conflicting reports that some civilians have been calling for the military, in fact, to take full control. Is that what you were hearing, and why would that be the case?
Well, to a huge degree, the military has been in charge of these processes, and they do, to a degree, influence public opinion and reshape it. Sudan's near and far history has a tendency of political and military elites who, pay people to present as supporting one camp or the other. Having said that, it's also important to realize that not everyone in Sudan was in support of the civilian government. Different people, different constituencies were their political position vis-a-vis the transitional process varied across the spectrum. So it's a kind of a delicate balance in considering who is with or against, and again, whether or not the people who are calling for a military coup were actually genuinely speaking of their own accords.
We'll definitely be watching the developments in Khartoum. Thank you very much, Ms. Makawi. And that was Raga Makawi, editor of the African Affairs Platform and a Sudanese analyst. Now, at least 30 people died and over 100 were wounded during intense fighting between the Somali National Army and its former ally, Ahlu Sunnah Wal Jama'a, in the Somali state of Galmudug over the weekend, according to residents and hospital officials. The clashes in the state's second-largest district of Gurichel run the risk of distracting both groups from their fights against Al-Shabaab, according to analysts and residents. This round of fighting broke out early Saturday and continued into Sunday. Both the Army and ASWJ were not reachable for comment. The group is made up of moderate Sufi Muslims, which has played a key role in the fight against the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab insurgency. Now to the Vatican, where Pope Francis on Sunday urged the international community to end the practice of returning migrants rescued at sea to Libya and other unsafe countries where he says they suffer inhumane violence. The pontiff made the comments after reciting his usual Angelus Sunday prayer in front of a crowd which had gathered in St. Peter's Square.
Primo, la mia vicinanza.
We need to stop returning migrants to unsafe countries and prioritize the rescue of human lives at sea with expectable means or rescue and disembark to guarantee them adequate life conditions alternative to detention, calibrated path of immigration and access to asylum procedures. We are all responsible for these brothers and sisters, victims of this situation for too many years, and silently pray for them.
Both Italy and Malta have come under criticism from human rights advocates for leaving migrants aboard crowded rescue boats before assigning them a safe port. UN refugee agency officials and human rights organizations have long denounced the conditions of detention centers for migrants in Libya, citing practices of beatings, rape, and forms of torture and insufficient food. Ethiopia conducted 2 airstrikes in Tigray on Sunday as the government intensifies a nearly week-old campaign of aerial bombardments against the rebellious forces who control most of the region. Government spokesperson Legesse Tulu says one strike hit the western Tigray area of Maitsebri, targeting a training site of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The other strike hit the northern Tigray town of Adwa, targeting a military manufacturing facility controlled by the TPLF, according to the government. It was not immediately possible to verify the claim, as communications are down throughout most of the war-ravaged Tigray. TPLF spokesperson Getachew Reda told Reuters he had verified with colleagues that an airstrike hit near a local hospital in Maitsebri. To West Africa, Mali's interim authorities say they will confirm a date for post-coup elections after national reform consultations in December, according to a representative of a UN Security Council delegation. The timeline is a further sign that Mali's military leadership is likely to extend an 18-month transition to constitutional rule that it originally promised would culminate in presidential and legislative elections in February of 2022. The UN delegation met transitional authorities, political parties, and civil society representatives in Bamako over the weekend to assess Mali's progress back to democracy following the August 2020 overthrow of the President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Niger's UN ambassador, Abdul Habari, says they were told the national reform talks in December will likely agree to an electoral schedule that would be announced soon afterward. Campaigning in Kenya is in high gear for the presidential election in August of 2022. Already there are concerns that elections will take place in a state of anxiety, and unless steps are taken now, there is a likely prospect of yet another disputed election. In a recent interview, Irongo Houghton, Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, told me Kenya's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission's nationwide voter registration drive ahead of 2022 polls is raising concerns.
7.5 million young people who have come of majority age. They have national identity cards, but the Electoral Commission does not have the resources to be able to register even up to 6 million of them. And in a country in which in the last elections, 40 million 14 to 15 million people voted. 7.5 million voters is a large number to disenfranchise. And of course, many of them will be young people and first-time voters. So it is a matter of major concern at the moment that we are able to move forward. We have learned reliably that the donor community, the diplomatic development partners in the country have been instructed not to give funding to the Electoral Commission and also to non-governmental organizations that would want to do voter registration. And why this is so important is obviously if you don't register 7.5 million young people, they have no stake in a liberal democracy. They have no stake in an election system that produces a government, and the potential for them to dismiss the entire model altogether is very high. The second concern is that if you do not invest in voter education, then many of the negative trends that we've been seeing, bribery, extortion, intimidation, and voter suppression, that this is very likely to be a factor in the next elections. And one last thought, I think, which is critical for some of us, is the degree to which digital disinformation will be a weapon in this coming election. And the real concern is that we will not be able to sift through innuendos, gossip, and incitement in order to see issues and candidates potentially who could make a difference in the body politic.
Yes. Now, if you know something, please help us understand why is it that for years and years, the Kenyan politicians, engage in campaigns, right? As you say, after the election, they engage in campaigns. They look forward to the next election. But it doesn't seem like they're interested in making the necessary reforms to the electoral systems, to the electoral body. And then when the elections come, they participate in the election, and then obviously they have issues with the results of that election, or they have issues with the process at that moment. Why not have reforms in the 5 years preceding the elections?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. Once we passed the 2010 Constitution, we made it very clear that elections should be managed by an independent body. We have a very clear statute within our Constitution, Article 81, that says simply that every vote must be counted, everybody has a right to vote, and that everybody should vote in an environment that is free of intimidation and corruption. But despite that constitutional aspiration, the Electoral Commission has had a history of instability. It has been attacked, and demonstrated against. And in many cases, I think the political class treat the Electoral Commission really as a committee of party agents rather than an independent body whose responsibility is to protect the sanctity of the vote.
Yeah, but then this is what is mind-boggling. All these political leaders are smart people, they're intelligent people. They know that if you don't have an independent, credible electoral body, the elections will never be acceptable, they will never be credible. Why don't either side, whether it's the opposition or those on the government side, seem to have an interest in actually creating the most favorable conditions for holding a credible, acceptable election? Why?
I think partly most politicians see elections as an existential threat to themselves, that they must win at all costs, and that there is no glory in losing an election, and therefore having an independent referee is seen as a vulnerability rather than seen as an asset. And I sometimes, like you, I really get shocked by the level of brazenness in terms of the attempt to essentially push the Electoral Commission far from its independence into the camp of one politician or one political camp or the other. And I think another example of this really is the gerrymandering around campaign financing. We've had several attempts to try and create ceilings for financial campaigns for any of the 6 positions. We've also had attempts to try and ensure that the public have a right to know who is funding these campaigns. Successive attempts to try and build guidelines into this process have been stopped by the National Assembly And the most recent of that is in the last month or so.
And that was Rongo Houghton, Executive Director of Amnesty International, Kenya. Now, we're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, millions of Americans are gearing up to receive their COVID-19 booster shot. However, there is still controversy over vaccine mandates. But first, Heidi Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's edition of Straight Talk Africa.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we're going to look at the impact of COVID-19 restrictions on air travel in Africa. As countries reopen their skies and travelers board planes again, where do African countries stand on vaccine passports? We'll also look at how much it will cost you to get COVID-19 tests at Africa's airports. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Millions of people in the United States are gearing up to get COVID-19 booster shots amid an ongoing controversy over vaccine mandates. Michelle Quinn reports.
With 77% of Americans having received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, people are talking about what they should do next. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has approved booster shots to some extent for all three approved vaccines, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer. For the booster, the CDC says people can pick a different shot than the one they received, essentially mixing and matching vaccines.
That it allows a considerable degree of flexibility for people to get what we hope they will get, namely a booster that will increase and optimize their protection.
This week, health officials will meet to discuss Pfizer's report that its vaccine is safe and effective for children ages 5 to 11, setting up the possibility that inoculations for them may start in early November. News of boosters and the possible vaccination of children comes as a little more than 22% of adults in the U.S. have yet to receive a single dose. Employers continue to roll out vaccination mandates. American Airlines says its employees must submit proof of vaccination by the end of November or face being fired. New York is offering city employees who haven't been vaccinated $500 for their first dose, but promising consequences for those who refuse.
If not, as we saw with healthcare, with education, you get a letter that says, on November 1st, you're going to go on leave without pay. We don't want that for anyone. We just want to get people vaccinated.
The New York City Police Union said the decision to be vaccinated was a personal medical decision, and it would seek legal action to protect members' rights. Vaccine mandates remain controversial, with 58% of Americans saying in a recent Hill-Harris X poll that the directives are helping the battle against COVID-19. 24% say mandates are hurting. That divide is similar when it comes to whether the mandates are helping the economy, with 51% saying the policies help and 35% say they hurt. How the U.S. handles the pandemic in coming months will likely have a political fallout. In addition to the pandemic, Americans are worried about the economy, inflation, and supply chain issues. In recent weeks, President Joe Biden's approval rating has slipped, averaging 43%. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
The South Korean television show Squid Game has become Netflix's biggest series launch ever, topping 111 million viewers worldwide. Karina Bafratian examines the phenomenon of the Squid Game.
Since the mid-September release of the South Korean series Squid Game on Netflix, over 132 million people around the world have started watching the show, according to Bloomberg. No other Netflix project has become so popular so quickly. The 9-episode series is about a world where children's games turn deadly. People who are deeply in debt play to win a giant cash prize, but in these games, the loser dies. Despite its dark content, the show was an instant hit.
Squid Game comes out. Some people discover it. It's in some people's queues. That's that. Then it starts becoming huge. Then every late night talk show host is talking about it. Pretty soon, everybody at work or on your Zoom call is talking about it. The idea that it really taps into something we can all identify with, or many of us can identify with, which is the idea of being on the edge of an economic disaster. And then the way they handle it.
It's a relatively new thing for Americans to enthusiastically embrace a foreign TV show.
For so long, I mean, Americans were really known for almost their stubborn, aggressive adherence to not consuming product made in another country. We exported all of our movies and our music and our TV shows, but very few things came the other way. But I think we've been slowly but surely kind of training the ugly American attitude towards this stuff.
Squid Game isn't just a hit in the US and South Korea. It's a worldwide hit. One Beijing cafe, for example, holds workshops for those willing to make sugar cookies, just like the ones in the show.
I watched the show and I thought it was very interesting. I was especially impressed by the episode with the cookies. There are a lot of young people among our customers who also love the show. So we decided to give them a chance to make those cookies themselves.
And in Moscow, visitors to a Korean cafe chain can play a game involving sugar cookies, similar to the one in the show. They need to, using only a needle, carve a particular shape on top of the cookie without crumbling it.
My task is to keep an eye on the people. If they lose, I need to bring them their punishment. In our case, it's pepper. We also keep an eye on time. We only give 10 minutes per game. So we make sure each player has only 10 minutes.
It's still unclear whether there will be a second season of Squid Game. Neither the show creators nor Netflix representatives have made any statements yet. But since Netflix's profits for the show reached about $900 million, it seems to make sense, at least financially. Karina Befredjin for VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.